Story 1. This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. I had just moved to a new neighborhood, a quiet suburban area with houses spaced far apart, each with sprawling lawns and large trees. It seemed like the perfect place to escape the chaos of city life. But something about the house directly across from mine always unsettled me. At first, it was just the odd little things. I noticed the house always had its lights on at strange hours, even in the middle of the night, but there was never any sign of life. I never saw anyone enter or leave, and the yard was perfectly manicured, as though untouched for years. But what bothered me the most was the window on the second floor, directly across from mine. It was large, with sheer curtains that fluttered slightly even when there was no breeze. One evening, as I sat in my living room, I saw the figure of a person standing in the window. I couldn't make out any details, just the dark silhouette of someone staring at me. I froze, my heart raced, and I tried to blink the image away. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I told myself it was probably just my imagination, or perhaps some trick of the light. But deep down, I knew something was off. The next day, I found something strange outside my house. Hidden behind the bushes in front of my door was an old camera. The lens was cracked, but it seemed strangely familiar, as though I had seen it somewhere before. I picked it up and turned it over. There was no label, no brand, just a faded sticker that had worn off with time. I felt a chill run down my spine. It had clearly been left there intentionally. But why? That night, I decided to investigate. I crossed the street and walked up to the front of the house. As I got closer, I noticed the blinds were drawn halfway. Curiosity gnawed at me, so I crouched down and peered through the small gap between the curtains. What I saw made my blood run cold. Inside, there was no furniture, just empty walls. And standing in the middle of the room was a figure. Its features were obscured by shadows, but it looked wrong. Its arms were unnaturally long, its limbs too thin. And then it turned toward me. I could see its eyes now, two dark holes that seemed to pierce through the glass directly at me. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, unable to tear my eyes away. The figure didn't move, just stared, as if waiting for something. I turned to run, but before I could get more than a few steps, a voice whispered in my ear, so faint I almost didn't hear it. "Get out now." The voice was low, raspy, and filled with malice. My legs gave out, and I collapsed to the ground, too terrified to move. I ran back to my house, locked every door and window, and stayed up all night, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. But the next morning, the camera was gone. There was no sign of it anywhere. For weeks, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The house across the street remained empty, but every night, the lights flickered in strange patterns. It wasn't consistent. Sometimes the lights would flash like they were trying to communicate something. Other times they would go completely dark. I started to notice other things. Every time I looked out my window, the house seemed a little more present, as though it were alive, watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I started to see movement in the windows. At first, it was just a blur, a figure walking past a window, or a shadow moving too quickly to follow. But as I watched more closely, it became clearer. One evening, I noticed that the blinds in the second-floor window were fully open, a rarity for that house. I stared into the darkened room, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flash of movement, a figure standing at the window, much closer this time. But when I looked away for just a second, it was gone. I was about to turn away when I caught a glimpse of something else, something in the reflection of the glass. A shadow moved across my own living room window. I jumped back, my breath catching in my throat. I ran to the other side of the house, peering through the side window. Nothing. I was alone in my house. But the reflection in the glass had been there. Something or someone had been inside, standing in the exact spot where I'd been moments before. I could feel my heart racing. Was I being paranoid? Was my mind playing tricks on me? Or was there something or someone trying to send me a message? The unease became unbearable. I couldn't stay in my own house anymore. That night, I decided to go to the local police station and tell them everything. I had to do something. But when I arrived, I was told the house across the street hadn't been occupied for years. No one had lived there for over a decade, and yet I was certain I had seen something, inside. The officer looked at me skeptically, but said he would send someone to check it out. I waited nervously for hours. When the officer returned, he was shaking. "There's no one in that house," he said. "There's never been anyone there. It's just an empty shell." The investigation came to a screeching halt, but I couldn't let it go. I couldn't forget what I had seen, or what I thought I had seen. The following week, I was cleaning my house when I decided to rearrange the furniture. As I moved the couch away from the wall, something fell behind it, a small, rectangular object. I bent down and picked it up. It was another camera, this one much older than the last. Its body was covered in dust, and the lens was cracked, but it seemed functional. It was the same camera I had found outside my house, the exact same model. I didn't know whether to laugh at myself for being paranoid or scream in terror at the implications. I ran to the living room, grabbed the camera I had found earlier, and compared them side by side. The two were identical, but there was one difference. This one had a roll of film inside. I wasted no time developing the film. What I saw made my stomach churn. There, clearly visible in one of the frames, was a picture of me standing in front of my house, staring across the street. But there was something else. Someone standing in the window of the house across the street, staring directly at me. But the strangest part was the date on the photo. It was from 2 days before I'd even moved into the house. I went outside to look at the house across the street one last time. The lights were off. The house was dark, empty, but I swore I saw something in the reflection of the window. A figure, standing just behind the curtain, watching me. And then I realized it was me. I had never been the one watching. I had always been the one being watched. But who was watching me now? Story 2. This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Just me and a few friends going camping in the woods. We had rented a cabin that seemed perfect, isolated, quiet, and far away from the city. The kind of place you go to escape the noise, to reconnect with nature. We drove for hours until we finally reached our destination, nestled deep in the trees, with no cell service and barely any signs of civilization around. When we arrived, the cabin looked old, but not run down, just the kind of rustic charm you'd expect from a mountain retreat. The air was crisp, the smell of pine trees heavy in the atmosphere. The front door was slightly ajar, as if welcoming us in. We stepped inside, but something felt off. The cabin was too quiet. No birds chirped, no rustling leaves. It felt almost abandoned. "All right, let's make ourselves a home," my friend Alex said as he walked inside. "I'll get the fire going." He went to the fireplace, and the rest of us started exploring the cabin. The place seemed ordinary at first. Dusty furniture, old photographs on the walls, and old wooden beams supporting the ceiling. It felt like a time capsule, left untouched for years. But then, we found something strange in the corner of the room. A dusty camera sitting on a table. It was old, the kind with the manual film roll, and its lens was cracked. "Look at this thing," I said, picking it up. "What is it doing here?" We didn't think much of it at the time. Alex insisted we should clean up and get the fire going, but I felt uneasy, like something was watching us. Every time I turned around, I felt the weight of unseen eyes. As the night fell, the wind began to pick up, howling through the trees. The fire crackled on the hearth, and we ate dinner. But there was something that I couldn't shake off. Every now and then, I would hear something. Footsteps on the porch, faint knocks on the door, something tapping at the windows. But when I looked outside, nothing was there. My friends started to notice it too, but we all chalked it up to the wind or our imaginations running wild. Then came the sound of something heavy moving in the attic. "Who's up there?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. No one responded. My friends stared at each other, confused and worried. We're the only ones here. I grabbed a flashlight and went up to the attic. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight as I ascended, and I scanned the room. There was nothing but old furniture and boxes stacked in the corners. But the air felt different, colder. My breath puffed out in the beam of my flashlight. That's when I noticed the wall. It was covered in strange markings, scratches, deep gouges in the wood that looked like they'd been made in desperation. I quickly turned around and bolted back downstairs, my heart pounding. Let's leave. Now! My friends didn't argue. But just as we were heading for the door, I looked back one last time at the camera on the table. Something about it called to me. I reached out, grabbed it, and stuck it in my bag, thinking it might be worth something, or at the very least, something to explain the strange feeling that had been growing in my gut. The next morning, we packed up and headed back to the car, the eerie feeling still lingering in the cabin. I told myself I'd never come back, that the place had an unsettling vibe, but when we got home, I couldn't shake the image of the camera. It had been left there for a reason, and I needed to know why. I took the film out and got it developed. When I saw the pictures, my stomach turned. The first few were normal, us sitting around the campfire, laughing, posing for photos, but then something changed. In one of the shots, I could see a figure in the background, faint, blurry, but unmistakable. It looked like a person, standing by the window of the cabin, watching us. The next photo showed the same figure, this time close to the camera, its eyes wide, its mouth slightly open as though it was about to speak. But no one was standing near the window when we took the photo. We were all sitting outside. I showed my friends, but they laughed it off, say it was just a trick of the camera, that it was probably just someone passing by. Or maybe the wind had blown something in the window. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. The photos kept running through my mind. There was something wrong with the cabin. It wasn't just a building. It was something else, something dark. I went back through the photos, zooming in on the figure. The more I looked, the more I noticed there were scratches like claw marks across its face. And then I saw it. In the background of the last photo, just barely visible, there was a second figure, a shadow standing behind the first. A tall, dark shape that blended into the trees. I didn't know what to think. I tried to dismiss it, telling myself I was just imagining things. But the more I looked at the photos, the more convinced I became. The figure wasn't human. It wasn't something that belonged in this world. The next day, I decided to go back to the cabin. I had to know what was going on. The weather had turned cold, and the forest was eerily quiet as I approached the cabin again. The door was shut tight, but when I tried the handle, it turned easily in my hand. I stepped inside, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet. Everything was just as we had left it. But when I reached the attic, my heart dropped. The markings on the wall were fresh, new, deeper scratches had been added. And there, in the corner, was the camera again, sitting exactly where it had been. I backed away slowly, but before I could turn around, I heard a loud bang. The door slammed shut behind me. I couldn't breathe. Panic set in as I realized I was no longer alone. The shadows began to move, shifting, creeping, sliding along the walls. I turned to run, but my feet felt like they were stuck to the floor. Something was pulling me back, holding me in place. The shadows closed in, and I felt cold fingers brush against my skin. Suddenly, the door flew open, and I was outside, gasping for air. My friends were there, staring at me in confusion. I didn't know how I had gotten out, but I was free. I didn't look back. But when I returned home, I discovered something even more horrifying. The photos were gone. Every single one of them had been wiped clean from the roll, replaced with new ones. Only this time, the figures weren't blurry. They were crystal clear, and they were standing just behind me. I never spoke about the cabin again, but the images haunted me. I threw the camera away, but it kept coming back. I would find it in places I didn't remember leaving it, hidden in drawers, under my bed, and even on my kitchen table. One evening, I came home to find a camera sitting on my kitchen counter. I picked it up, heart racing. I opened it to find the last roll of film, untouched. It was as if the camera had a mind of its own, constantly pulling me back into its grip. I developed the photos once more. This time, there was no mistaking it. The figure in the photos was me. It was standing behind me, in every shot. And there, in the last photo, was the shadowed figure, the one from the cabin, staring directly at me. I realized the truth. The cabin had never been abandoned. It had been waiting for someone to uncover its secrets. And now it was following me. The figures in the photos were no longer just figments of my imagination. They were real, and they were coming for me. I burned the camera, but the haunting never stopped. Late at night, I hear scratching at my door, soft knocks, and sometimes faint whispers in the wind. The camera is gone, but I know it's still out there, waiting to bring me back to the cabin, where the shadows are always watching. Story 3. This story was sent by a viewer, and it happened some time ago. I've always had an odd fascination with antique furniture. The older, the better. So, when I stumbled across a beautiful old mirror at a yard sale one afternoon, I knew I had to have it. The frame was intricately carved, an art piece in itself, and there was something captivating about the glass. It wasn't perfectly clear, but slightly warped, as if it had seen centuries of history reflected in it. The vendor told me it was an heirloom, passed down through generations, and that it was meant to be kept in the home of someone who understood its power. I scoffed at the superstition, thinking it was just a clever sales pitch. But I bought it anyway. That night, I hung the mirror in my bedroom. Something about it felt strange. I could feel its presence in the room, like it was watching me. I thought it was just my imagination running wild, but every time I passed by it, I noticed something odd. My reflection didn't match my movements exactly. It seemed delayed, almost as though it wasn't just me in the mirror. At first, it was subtle, a slight lag in my movements, like I was seeing a shadow of myself. But the longer I stared at it, the more the reflection began to behave unnaturally. My reflection would smile when I frowned, blink when I wasn't, and sometimes it would do things I didn't do at all. I would lift my hand to adjust my hair, and the reflection would do the same, but its hand would stay frozen for a moment longer than mine, as though it was waiting for something. I tried to ignore it, thinking I was just overtired, but the unease kept creeping up on me. One night, after a long day, I decided to get some rest. As I lay in bed, the mirror reflected the room around me in the dim moonlight. I could see my own body lying on the bed, but then something caught my eye, the reflection of the room behind me. It was wrong. It wasn't just a reflection of my bedroom. It was showing an entirely different room, a room I didn't recognize. I rushed to the mirror, my heart pounding in my chest, but when I looked into it, I saw my own reflection, standing behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone in the room with me, but there was no one. I was alone. Chapter 2. The following days became a blur of anxiety and fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that the mirror wasn't just reflecting my image. It was something more, something alive. The reflection grew more detailed, more independent. One night, I watched as my reflection blinked, twice in quick succession, before I even had the chance to blink. It seemed like it was watching me more closely, moving as if it had its own thoughts. It was no longer mimicking me. It was doing things I didn't expect. I decided to do an experiment. I stood in front of the mirror and began to act out random movements. First, I waved my hand, then clapped, but the reflection didn't just mirror my movements. It mimicked them with an eerie, perfect delay. When I stopped moving, it continued for a fraction of a second longer before catching up. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as if something was wrong, terribly wrong. I ran my hand along the glass, almost daring the reflection to do something different, but it stayed still. Then I noticed it again. A shift, a subtle change in the reflection. I could see the faint outline of something or someone moving behind me. I turned quickly, but again there was nothing, just the empty room. My breath hitched. I could feel my reflection's eyes, staring at me now, not as a mere image, but as something more sinister. The next morning, I found something strange. A new mark appeared on the surface of the mirror, just beneath the glass. It was faint but unmistakable, a handprint. My heart sank as I traced the outline of it with my fingers. It didn't belong to me. It was larger, the fingers longer, and it felt wrong. I wiped the glass clean, but the handprint remained. In a panic, I tried to remove the mirror, but it was stuck, frozen in place on the wall. No matter how hard I pulled or pushed, it wouldn't budge. I decided I needed to find out more about this cursed object. So I went back to the yard sale, hoping the vendor could explain. But when I arrived at the house, it was abandoned. The yard was empty, the house dark and dilapidated. No sign of the vendor, no trace of the mirror I had bought. It was as though everything had vanished overnight. Chapter 3. I returned home, frantic and desperate for answers. I could no longer ignore what the mirror had become. It wasn't just an object. It was a gateway, an opening to something dark, something that was trying to cross over. The reflection began to grow more vivid, more aggressive. I would see it in the mirror every time I passed, even when I didn't look directly at it. The figure was always there watching me, but now it seemed to move independently of me. Sometimes it would grin, its smile too wide, its eyes too dark. Other times, it would reach out toward the edge of the frame, as if trying to grab me. And every time I looked away, I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I wasn't just afraid of what was in the mirror. I was terrified of what would happen if I looked too long. One night, I couldn't resist any longer. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the reflection. It was almost as if something was pulling me in, drawing me closer to it. My reflection looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of recognition in its eyes. It smiled, slowly, and then it whispered, "Come to me." Before I could react, the reflection reached out, its fingers curling around the edge of the frame, trying to pull itself through. My own hand shot forward, but instead of touching the glass, it felt like my hand was sinking into it, cold, slick, like I was being sucked into the mirror. I screamed, tried to pull away, but it was too late. My reflection, now fully formed and no longer just a reflection, reached through the glass, its cold, skeletal fingers gripping my arm. With a sudden yank, it dragged me toward the mirror. I fought back, but my strength was no match for its grip. And then, in one horrific, overwhelming moment, the reflection pulled me inside, and everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the floor in front of the mirror. I was back in my room, but it wasn't my room anymore. The furniture was different. The walls were dark and cracked, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. I stumbled to my feet, disoriented, and turned toward the mirror. But this time, it wasn't me staring back. It was someone else, someone with my face, and they were smiling.